Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I want to revisit the giant thing. I talked about giants in an earlier video, and and human beings coming from a test tube and things like this. Some of the, I got a lot of questions about those things, so I want to, talk about that a little further, but I want to start off here. So this is the front page of the Huffington Post. Slow sink. GOP rep lays into big lie party. And so what this is about is Liz Cheney was disempowered because they chose Trump over Liz Cheney. And if you've watched the liberal news over the last couple of days, they've been feasting on that. And then there's this. Jim Costa calls out right-wing Trump cult for cancel culture hypocrisy. Now, I've called the Trumpers and the Trump movement a cult myself. But if they're a cult, then these liberal, news media, Hollywood celebrities are also a cult, right? And a cult in the sense that they're leading you in the wrong direction and they believe that there's something that they're not. Somehow they're on a, righteous path. And the difference between a cult and a true spiritual organization is whether it's actually connecting you to God or not. Like in anything, it's whether it really delivers, whether the system really delivers. Because the difference between something good and something bad is whether the thing delivers or not. Whether the movement is a true movement. Because there's lots of similarities between a true religious or spiritual movement and a cult, right? And so you can have two relationships. Let's say two brothers find women that they love. And one of the brothers has a good wife, has a good girlfriend who will be a great wife and mother. She's a person with good character qualities. The other brother has a woman who's acting and faking, and once they get married, she's going to be a nightmare. You understand this. People have this with, you could reverse it with, two sisters have potential husbands. And so it's really whether the person is going to deliver on their promises. They're going to deliver on, when in the beginning of relationships, people are always good. People are in the honeymoon period. But is it going to be able to sustain the problems and difficulties of life? And that depends on one's character.
About a party and pundits and that poisoned apple of disinformation.
See, one of these things that's happened is the left is using a term that used to be exclusive to the truther movement, to the so-called conspiracy theorists, because disinformation was a word that was only used, by people in the truth community 7 years ago, 5 years ago, and now they're using that word themselves. CNN is disinformation. MSNBC is disinformation, as is Fox. But they all use the word. They all use that word like, they're calling out lies when they're the liars, right? And they use it against each other. Here at CNN, which is disinformation, is using the term disinformation to do with Fox, which is also disinformation.
Woke up and I saw Snow White is now in trouble. Molly, I was just like, well, it must be Monday.
This is a princess who would, I believe, die if she didn't receive this kiss.
Cancel culture going after poor little Snow White.
The kiss saves her life. She was poisoned by the witch.
Mm-hmm. He's so upset about this, Cheryl.
It's ridiculous. I totally agree with you guys.
Yeah, riveting. Fox News hitting hard here.
Hold on. Not to be grumpy, but
You could never be grumpy, Jim Costa.
This is just dopey. And I don't want to spend too much time.
He's doing dwarf references. What a sad little man. He's a sad little CNN man with his, he's pretending that he's got a lively tie, but he's as somber as the rest of them. It doesn't look like a somber tie, but he's a somber dude. Being somber, making references to dwarves, because Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. And when they try to be funny, when they try to make jokes and they just fail so bad, just stick to what you're good at, which is sucking at reporting the news. That's your wheelhouse.
Time on this. It started with a story in the San Francisco Gate about the Snow White ride at Disneyland and whether the prince's true love's kiss was appropriate to display. Of course, the network that's obsessed with cancel culture couldn't resist the urge to spread a new fairy tale about the evil of wokeness in American society.
I'm not defending Fox News here, and they could get rid of all Disney stuff and I wouldn't care, right? But in terms of wokeness and the cancel culture, it sucks. And the right was all about cancel culture themselves. So, you know, I'm not saying it's just for the left, but right now the left has the power and they're just canceling everything they can get their hands on.
They even found a senator to take a bite.
You know, sometimes I think we are so screwed. I don't know where these jackaloons come up with this.
I was hoping you'd use the word jackaloons. You know, that's what my morning was missing, the word jackaloons.
Stuff.
And if all of this sounds familiar, it's because you've heard it before. Just swap out Snow White for Dr. Seuss or the Muppets or Mr. Potato Head, Mr. Potato Head, Mr. Potato Head.
Look at Jim Costa bringing you the hard-hitting stories, right?
As you know, Dr. Seuss has been cancelled.
I do not like to cancel books. I do not like how that looks.
Wow, that was so sad. Jim Acosta.
First it was Kermit the Frog and the Muppets, Mr. Potato Head, then now, Dr. Seuss.
I do not like it here nor there. I do not like it anywhere.
This week alone, they canceled Mr. Potato Head. This week alone, they canceled the Muppets.
I do not like it in the store. I do not want it anymore.
What is this it that you speak of that you don't want it anymore and you don't want it in the store?
Sometimes the complaints about cancel culture involve playing the victim, like that time Senator Josh Hawley claimed he was being silenced.
You know, the guy is so stiff. This is the guy who always got into it with Trump. And for a actor, right, because that's what these guys are, they are people that promote themselves as a celebrity. Now you have celebrity news people, and this guy is one of them. And calling out Trump was for him to get in with the, woke gang, right? And be, oh, look at that guy. He's always going after Trump. He was disrespecting the presidency, which I don't give a crap about. Like, disrespect it all you want, but it's something where, in terms of people who believe in America, like it's a bad thing.
During a live interview.
Don't try to censor, cancel, and silence me here. You raise the issue.
Senator,
so if you raise the issue...
Senator, this is a Wendy's. Either way, this is faux outrage. Feels like it's coming off of an assembly line. You might say, at a factory.
Yeah, that's how I feel about CNN, right? They just repeat the same talking points on CNN and MSNBC. Fox does it for, a similar way. All three of them suck, but it's just assembly line news. It follows a pattern. They don't deviate from that pattern, a very narrow bandwidth of what they're allowed to talk about.
But here's the thing. The same far-right voices railing against cancel culture, they love to cancel, silence, harass, and banish anyone who won't pucker up and show some love to Donald Trump's big lie about the 2020 election.
See, this is where they all are into cancel culture, the Republicans and the Democrats, but there is a truth outside of the cubies and the wokeness, right? People who are woke and the cubies. Those are people who are still connected to the idea of the left and the right. And beyond that is where we reside. And it's a much higher level of existence than these clowns, right? Like I said before, Master Chargy of the Heartfulness system said, you have to understand that the lowest part of the higher is still higher than the highest part of the lower. And these guys are on a lower level of consciousness. They've bought into the mainstream culture. They are the gatekeepers for deception, for this deception of a left-right paradigm to keep people distracted from the true nature of our system. The true, abomination of our system, the debt-based economy, the, capitalist system, the idea that everybody can be wealthy, and that's not true. The idea of wealth means you have more than other people. If you're wealthy, that means you have more than other people. Everyone wanting to be wealthy, but only some can. And I'll come back to that because I want to talk about the dollar. But this is where all this stuff resides, right? This is where the news resides on a very low level of consciousness, where they're gatekeepers to the lie.
Take, for example, the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy.
Do you like green eggs and ham? I do not like them, Sam I am. I do not like green eggs and ham.
McCarthy came to the rescue of Dr. Seuss, but not his fellow House Republican leader, Liz Cheney, when she spoke her conscience and denounced the big lie.
She didn't speak her conscience. Like, that's not her speaking her conscience. She was enemies with Trump. The Cheneys are enemies with Trump. They're old school power Republicans who want their party back from Trump. And that's why she said what she said. It had nothing to do with her speaking her conscience. She's not a good person. She didn't speak truth. She did what she thought was best for herself politically. And the power of Trump has taken her down. There is no longer the power of the Cheneys and the Bushes and the neocons. It's, a dormant aspect of the Republican Party. But the Republican establishment wants Trump gone, but they can't live without him because he is the rock star of their party. And so that's what they did, right?
The president and many around him pushed this idea that the election had been stolen. And that is a dangerous claim. It wasn't true. The election wasn't stolen. The notion that the election had been stolen or that the election was rigged.
So first of all, aside from the accusations about, the electronic voting and or them changing the last minute because of COVID and making all these mail-in ballots, which certainly hurt Trump. Trump lost because of mail-in ballots. And when you change the way that you process ballots, you change the way the election process works, in some cases like a month ahead of time, but in all of them like a couple of months ahead of time, then there's a good chance there's going to be issues, and it opens the door for cheating. It's a lot easier to cheat when you're using a process for the first time. It's, of course, going to be easier to cheat. It's going to be easier to make mistakes. And this is a very contentious election. And so there was all these accusations of voter fraud and voter cheating by Trump and people on the right. Some of them were ridiculous. Some of them were just, they were just out there. But some of them could have been more legitimate, and they were never really thoroughly investigated in a way that the right-wing people would accept the results, and maybe they would never accept the results. I didn't vote for Trump, but I can say that there is some legitimacy to people being upset by a lack of transparency and how they shut that process down. And we'll never know, because unless it's investigated, and again, it's already been certified and Joe Biden's the president, see, there's always the potential for cheating. There's always, a missed call in a sporting event. I mean, there's always, some ways that the outcome of a contest might be delegitimized. But once it's accepted, it's over, unless there's some sort of they discovered someone was taking steroids or whatever it might be, in athletics, and things come in later. But Joe Biden's going to be the president. They're not going to overturn this thing. It's already a done deal, and everyone should accept it and know that there's always some level of cheating. There's always some level of cheating. So that's the voting process itself. And everybody, when they think about an election being rigged, they think about the voting process. But there's other ways that the system is rigged and the elections are all rigged beyond the votes themselves. This is something that has nothing to do with the votes. It's just an unfair system. Because all these elections are rigged in the sense that only a handful of people get to run for president because they don't have enough money behind them. And you can see the candidates they're taking out, right? So there was 22 odd candidates, maybe more, 25. And these were what were considered serious candidates, people who were senators, people who were congressmen, somebody like Marianne Williamson and that guy Yang, right? John Yang, what's his name? Yang, and people like that who are, public celebrities, but they have no chance of winning. Tulsi Gabbard had no chance of winning. There's all these people that they have zero chance of becoming president. And they're just looked at like, this guy Kucinich years ago. People like that who are, extreme. They're at the farthest extreme point of view, still within the bandwidth, right? They're flirting with becoming truthers almost. They're at the edge of the bandwidth of things that they're allowed to talk about or things that are considered legitimate. And where we are is we're outside that bandwidth. We're in the world of either things that you're not allowed to talk about, you're not supposed to talk about, or they're not considered legitimate things. They're just crazy conspiracy theories. But these candidates are within that narrow bandwidth, and the ones that are sort of on the more extreme end don't have any real chance of winning the nomination or becoming president. And they're not middle-of-the-road people. And even somebody like Bernie Sanders never had a real shot of ever winning the nomination. He was an independent and somebody who was progressive and, campaigning on extreme liberal ideas. And the Democratic Party doesn't want any part of that. And even to a certain extent, Elizabeth Warren, who is a more centrist version of Bernie, running on his platform. And so none of those people had much of a chance. And they looked at the field and they thought the best person, the best shill for them, the best establishment candidate was Joe Biden, even though nobody wanted him. And so what they did is set up the election, the primary, so Joe Biden would win. They liked Kamala in the beginning, but she, never polled. If she went up to like 12% for a little while when they were really pushing her out there. In fact, Chris Matthews, in the beginning of this thing, I had it somewhere. I can't find the clip. Chris Matthews, the disgraced Chris Matthews who got Me Too'd, said, wouldn't it be a wonderful ticket if we had Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? So he was pitching the idea that eventually became what happened. He was an establishment person. And so Kamala never polled, she got up to 12%, then went down below 1%. She stayed there. So she dropped out. But even though people didn't like her, they still were going to push her on the Democrats later on. And that's what they also did with Joe Biden. And so Joe Biden, he lost the first two primaries, New Hampshire and Iowa, substantially. The voters voted, and they said they didn't want any part of him. He was saved in South Carolina by Clyburn, and then the whole Democratic establishment and the media got behind him. And they rigged the election. They said, there's no way we're going to have Bernie. They said this on news shows like this. They literally came on these news shows and said, yeah, we're not having Bernie. Like they were just announcing it, that they were rigging the election. They made a deal with Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg to drop out right before Big Tuesday, Super Tuesday or whatever it's called. And they threw their support behind Joe. And now Pete Buttigieg has been rewarded with a transportation secretary position that he doesn't deserve, boosting his brand, boosting his potential to be a president in the future. And then they had Lizzie Warren stay in, who divided the votes against Bernie, and it was over. Bernie lost because they rigged it against him. And in the previous primary with Hillary Clinton, they did hit pieces against JoJo for him not to run because they had pre-decided on Hillary, who was a nightmare candidate, right? And JoJo couldn't even beat her. Like, think about this. JoJo couldn't beat Hillary years before. And then when Bernie ran against Hillary, Donna Brazile, who came in for the disgraced former head of the DNC, whatever her name was, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, you remember her? And she was ousted by the DNC, and they put in Donna Brazile, who was, she did investigation into whether the thing was rigged against Bernie, and she found out that the DNC had been $12 million in debt, and they needed Hillary to bail them out with all her money. She had, $1 billion worth of election donations at the end. And so she bailed out the DNC, but said, I'm running this thing. And she was getting the questions to the debates with Bernie ahead of time. Like she was completely, they rigged it against Bernie. And Donna Brazile admitted this. She found it out, and she called Bernie and apologized to him. And so they rigged it against him once, which was disastrous for them because she got waxed by Trump, even though she had a 2-1 margin, right? And then the Democrats and Hillary cried that the election was rigged by the Russians. even though the media and everyone was behind her. And so the election was rigged, right? These elections are all rigged. I mean, the election just to get Joe Biden out there as a candidate. Then they hid Joe Biden away using COVID as an excuse, and they hammered away at Trump. They got Trump to close down the country, and they had the COVID panic, and they worked against Trump the entire time. I'm talking about the media and the establishment. Even the Republican Party was working against him, and Fox News bailed on him, right? And so it wasn't fair. Trump didn't get fair treatment because in a fair election, JoJo would never win. And there was ways to win elections and fix elections, and that's the media, and that's money. That you can make the elections exclusive, and before anybody casts a vote, you can skew the election in such a way that the outcome is already guaranteed. You know, when I was a kid, there was the Iran hostage crisis when Jimmy Carter was president, and the Republicans used that as a way to make sure he didn't win a second term. They sabotaged his efforts to get the hostages home, and Reagan eventually traded weapons for the hostages, which became the Iran-Contra scandal, right? And so it wasn't fair to Jimmy Carter, and before even one vote was cast, he had already lost. And you could say the same thing about Trump, that all the things that led up to the election, that Trump had lost even before one vote was counted or one vote was cast. It wasn't fair, and Liz Cheney knows this. They all know it. They all know that they worked to get rid of Trump. The Republican establishment, the Democratic establishment, and the media, including Fox News, all wanted to get rid of Trump, but they can't get rid of the guy because he was, sort of a real person. He wasn't this fake politician. He's a liar, and he's not an honest person, but he is who he is, right? He doesn't pretend to be something he isn't. He doesn't act presidential, and that's one of the things I liked about him, that he was at least a little bit more truthful of what a scumbag he was, right? And so it was clearly rigged against him in the sense of it wasn't a fair election. It wasn't a fair election. They all worked together, the establishment, including the Supreme Court. They all bailed on Trump. And so we'll never know what happened. I mean, at least, clearly what happened in terms of the votes. But everything else leading up to the election was rigged. And nobody can deny it. Like, you can lie about it, but, just look at the evidence. Think about Hunter Biden, because Hunter Biden was on crack, which he's now revealed. He had a crackhead son that got cushy jobs while he was on crack that he got because of, which he's basically admitted, his father's name and, influence with his father, who was vice president and then was running for president. He had dealings with foreign countries. He impregnated a stripper and had a crack baby, a stripper crack baby. He denied child support, said he wasn't even aware even being with the woman, because he was so messed up on drugs. All these things would have been covered if it was Trump's kids or in previous elections. These were major scandals, and the media pushed back against them, calling it fake news and pushing back against the New York Post's stories. And in most cases, other news agencies would have picked this story up. But they completely protected Joe Biden, even when they found out he was that Hunter was getting investigated by various states, and Attorney General Barr, William Barr, who was Trump's Attorney General, decided not to make that public right before the election and screwed Trump in that way. You understand this? So that wasn't fair. Like, if it was Trump's kid, they totally would have covered it. And so that's how they can skew an election without ever doing anything in terms of the votes. That's how it's unfair, right? That's how you can rig an election, by the media simply refusing to cover bad things against the candidate that they've chosen to elect. It wasn't fair, right? It wasn't fair for Bernie. It wasn't fair for Trump. And, it was rigged for JoJo and Kamala, who nobody likes, right? And Kamala should never be vice president. It wasn't like she was the second candidate. The second candidate, the person who finished second in the primary, like, she lost to everybody. She quit before receiving one vote because nobody wanted her, but they made her vice president. And it's likely she'll be installed as president at some point, the first woman president. And, all these historical things they'll claim. But she didn't win. She'll never win. Like, she'll never be somebody that people like and will vote for, legitimately.
The notion that the election had been stolen or that the election was rigged was a lie. And people need to understand that.
Instead, it was the big kiss-off.
I think she's got real problems. I've had it with her. It's, I've lost confidence. Well, someone just has to bring emotion, but I assume that will probably take place.
Which is pretty rich, considering McCarthy once called out Trump's actions during the insurrection.
And so let's move on from this report. Now, I agree that the Republicans and the right are a little bit hypocritical of cancel culture. Because my whole life growing up, I saw the Republicans and people on the right wanting to cancel people and canceling people. Now the power's on the left and they're complaining. But in terms of his ability in this piece, the whole premise of his story here is that the Republicans canceling Liz Cheney is similar to or equal to the Democrats and the liberals canceling Snow White, right? And it's not nearly the same, because one thing is content. One thing is movies and TV shows or a theme park or books or whatever, in Dr. Seuss's case, or toys in Mr. Potato Head. And that is consumers and people, these groups putting pressure on corporations or media organizations to cancel these things. Whereas the Republican Party is it's based in popularity of the candidates and the positions, and they're scared they're going to lose voters, and they're appealing and appeasing the Trump supporters and Trump, which is, what they need to do to survive. So this is not nearly the same thing, right? This isn't the cancellation of Liz Cheney, because that's going to be done by her voters in her state. But they are, in a sense, punishing her for going against what they consider the party lines and continually going out there and causing more problems and disenfranchising or pissing off Republican voters, and so making the party weaker. And I left out social media when I was talking about how the election was rigged. Social media allowed radical left people to post things on social media and promoted it when they were banning and deplatforming people on the right and people in the truth community. And so you're picking winners and losers. And these are private organizations. They can do that, but you can't say it's fair. If you look at all of these, social media giants, they're all liberal leaning. And so all of them combined to help prop up a candidate, a faulty candidate in JoJo, and to push back and censor Trump. And they banned him at the end of it. And so, it's a lie to say this is fair. It's a lie to say that you're legitimate news people reporting news objectively. And this guy, is just another one of these stiff, fake, self-promoting clowns. Dave Chappelle bashes SNL. No one is woke enough. Dave Chappelle has always sucked to me. I never found his stuff funny, like his sketch comedy. I mean, if you look at the difference between Key and Peele sketch comedy, some of the Key and Peele stuff is like just brilliant. Like, there's, multiple funny jokes. And then Dave Chappelle's show was always, kind of lame, like remedial stuff, like not very smart stuff. And his specials, they're not like brilliant or great, and he's become like the number one comedian. But this idea of promoting woke, because woke is not being awake. Woke is the extreme end of the liberal and the Democratic Party, a liberal agenda in the Democratic Party. You can be a liberal person and be awake. Like there's lots of liberal people that listen to my videos here. You can be a liberal person or have sort of liberal tendencies, a true liberal person, like they were in the 60s, that were about real stuff, real, oppression and things like this, and also like organic foods and nature and protecting the environment. Those are all good things about the liberal movement. If you go into a store and buy organic food, or healthy food that's in there, that isn't filled with GMOs and other crap, it's because of the liberal movement. There's a lot of great things that came out of legitimate liberalism. And let's go to this. Speaking of that, Gwyneth Paltrow drank whiskey every night during the COVID-19 lockdown. So she has this Goop thing, which is supposed to be about natural health, right? There's a lot of organic products and things like that, which is nullified if you drink whiskey every night. No matter how organic you are, no matter how healthy you are, if you're drinking whiskey, which is, just this harsh alcohol. I remember taking shots of wild turkey. One of my friends in college, that was, his thing, right? And, every once in a while he'd hand me a shot of wild turkey and I'd drink it. Like, why'd I just do that? It's freaking horrible. It's like burning my stomach. It's like battery acid and things like that. And people who are drinking whiskey when they're older, like I was in my 20s, when you do stupid things because you think you're indestructible. When you get older, I don't understand how people drink and function, like people my age, because it's hard enough if you just eat healthy and you try to have a healthy life. As you get older, you just slow down, your body doesn't work as well. It doesn't do well with toxins and drugs and things like this. And so these people are drinking martinis at lunch. I mean, look at all the ways alcohol is used in TV shows and movies. And Gwyneth Paltrow has produced a healthy lifestyle, another fake woke person, and yet she claims she drank whiskey. Gwyneth Paltrow hit the bottle every night during the pandemic in addition to gaining 14 pounds. The actress, who is well known for her wellness and lifestyle brand, Goop, concocted a lot of quinoa whiskey cocktails. Quinoa whiskey. Quinoa whiskey to help her get through the lockdown. I was drinking 7 nights a week and making pasta and eating bread, and I went totally off the rails. It just shows you, her whole thing is about health, and it took just this, over-exaggerated pandemic to get her to fall off the wagon and go full unhealthy. And this is everything you need to know about people who are woke. As soon as, things get rough, there's all these people who are yelling, defund the police, and then somebody comes up and threatens them and they go, call the cops, right? Alyssa Milano. People believe in something until it negatively affects them, and then they immediately reverse themselves. And that's everything you need to know about woke people, and also the QBs as well. So I want to get into this thing with giants and answer some questions about this and the idea of human beings being created in test tubes, this version of the human race, and where I get my information from and, my analysis of these things. And to start off with, I was talking to my wife about this last night because I was thinking about this in terms of how I was when I was a young person. And in terms of COVID stuff, if it happened back in the 80s or the 90s, I didn't watch the news, and I knew about some of these, alternative media conspiracy theory things from my brother. He had told me about the Federal Reserve, and, I had this sort of a mind, right? Years ago, I talked about when I was a little kid, I had to do a report, and I was doing on the Civil War, and I found this book or, this, whatever it was, in the library, and, some section of a book, and it talked about how the Civil War was really an economic war. It was never about slavery. The North was getting killed by the South economically, and so the South was becoming more powerful than the North in terms of their economic power. And so the North went after them and made it about slavery, but it wasn't really ever about that. And so I found that interesting as a kid. It was my first sort of, finding alternative information to what I was being told in my school. Everyone grows up and thinks that Abraham Lincoln was a hero, but he was actually pretty racist. He said some racist things. He didn't view black people as equals, but he was, he needed an excuse to start this economic war, as did the people of the North. And so that's a different understanding of the nature of civil war, because if you think about it in terms of the official story, the South is 100% wrong, right? The South was promoting slavery, and slavery is wrong. And so if the North is liberating the slaves, you're like, all right, the North is the heroes, the North are the good guys, and the South is the bad guys. But the North was using the idea of slavery, pretending they cared about the slaves and black people, which they didn't, to start a war with the South and then stop their economic growth. That's why they burned the South. Remember, they went in, they just burned the whole cities, which they didn't really need to do. Like, why would they do that? Because they wanted to take the South down economically. They wanted control of the country. And so there was a division between the North and the South, and they used slavery as an excuse. So the North is clearly not the heroes that everyone thinks they were. And Lincoln is clearly not the hero. And so when I realized that when I was a kid, I was like, I don't know, really young, like 8 or 9 or something like this. And I, couldn't articulate it like I'm just saying now. So I had that sort of a mind. But through my 20s and through my, even up to I was like my early 30s, I didn't really watch the news. I didn't care about the news. I didn't care about these things. And I was using drugs and things like this. So in terms of what's going on now with medical solutions that are controversial to COVID, like I probably would have just, I wouldn't have made a decision one way or another. I just would have let things happen, and I would have either taken it or not taken it based in, circumstances. Because there was this, recent concert and people are sending it to me, and, it's very easy to look at all these young people and say they're so dopey because they're doing faulty research or they're part of a woke movement. But most of them don't care. Like, I didn't have the patience to read up about alternative narratives or the news in general. Because you have to know the news. You have to watch the news first, and you have to go through the indoctrination to find out what the alternative view is. And as a young person, I had no interest in it. And at the time, it wasn't as severe as it is now. Like, it wasn't as important. Most of the stuff that was being given to people was slow kill type of stuff. Like cigarettes are slow kill. And medicines that were given were slow kill, right? They're things that take a long time to have a negative effect on the human body, where things are much more ramped up right now. We weren't on the verge of the dollar collapsing. And so as a young person, like thinking about myself as a young person, I don't think I would have been interested in the videos I make now. Like a younger version of myself would probably, not like these videos or, I'd not be interested in them, not in the information in them and things like this. Of course, the times are different, the internet being a part of this and, people waking up and big events that have happened. I'm just saying that because it's all about timing. And it's a big difference when you have kids and you start thinking about their future and what the world's going to be like for them. And as you get older, you start seeing your own mortality. You have like health issues. And all of a sudden, when you get out of bed in the morning, you're stiff and, you can't, bounce back. And if you eat, bad foods or you do, alcohol or drugs or something like that, you're really hungover and you can't, function the next day. And you realize you have to take better care of yourself. You just have to take more interest in your health and you have to do research and things like that. And so, that happens as you mature and you enter into your adult life. But when you're younger, you're indestructible. You don't think about it. There was a period of time where I was using cocaine and my friends were like wanting to freebase, right? And what we did was we poured ammonia over the coke through a coffee filter to, get rid of the cut or whatever it was. And then, smoke that, right? I mean, think about how stupid that is. Ammonia. Like, I can't even be around ammonia now. Like, as soon as I smell ammonia or bleach, like I'm chemically sensitive. But back in my early 20s, I was playing, 3 to 5 hours of basketball every night. And I was physically fit and I was in, incredible shape, the best shape of my life. I could do things like that. And I had a working liver, all these things. But it's just stupidity. And so when kids are partying and, making risky choices and things, I mean, people do that when they're, younger. Then they don't care about the, the COVID stuff and, doing whatever people demand of them of COVID, wearing masks and, getting this medication things. You don't think about as much because you're not worried as much. Or you are, and you're more trusting of the mainstream narrative and you're not, looking for alternative information. So that explains why there's like so many sheeple, because you have to be almost a certain age to start waking up. Like, it's a very rare occurrence when young people wake up completely. They wake up in a stupid way. Like, young people, they just don't have the conceptual ability, and they see it from a very emotional standpoint. The mainstream culture uses fear and emotion, just like the cubies do, and the woke movement all are about emotions. They're all about pushing emotions, saying things that are going to inflame people's emotions and get them riled up and get them, angry and, completely not thinking, right? Not, disconnected from their hearts and wound up in a sort of an angry mob type of a situation where they go out and they think they're totally justified for taking extreme actions because of their, point of view and the emotions that have been activated by the powers that be. And so that's why there's all these deceptive movements that the people think they're a part of some sort of truth movement, but they're really just being played. And the one great thing about the Heartfulness meditation, it helps a person mature, and it helps you, your emotions become manageable. Your fear becomes manageable. Your anger becomes manageable. And you learn to take a break and, look at the other side and just slow down. And that's one of the things that I do here differently than, there's a lot of fear-based truther channels, the Chicken Little channels, the Alex Jones model. And I had a couple of dopes that left comments. I wish I saved the comment. It was just one comment and somebody agreed with the person. But the person said something to the effect that I was, pitching fear by saying that the dollar was being devalued and was going to collapse, and that I was no different from Alex Jones. And I always talk about how Alex Jones pushes a Chicken Little fear-mongering model. The person wasn't this articulate, but they were trying to show that I was a hypocrite and I was also pushing fear, and that I was just like Alex Jones, even though I criticize him. And, there's a very simple explanation. If the person, I get this a lot where people leave comments. Well, then the second comment was a person said, yeah, he's a shill, right? Which is funny, like somebody who's, there's that movie Horton Hears a Who, that Dr. Seuss thing, and there's like the two rabbits, and then there's like the little, there's like a big Karen rabbit, and the little Karen rabbit comes out and says, me too, right? You get a lot of those type of people that, just jump on something. But there's three essential differences, and if you listen to my videos and you had the ability to, differentiate, like there's differential diagnoses in the DSM-4 and DSM-5 now, that there are similar type of psychological conditions, and there's also physical conditions, I'm sure, as well, for doctors that are very similar, that have similar symptoms. And so you have to do a differential diagnosis, and you have to be able to see the subtle distinctions, but these aren't very subtle, between the way I present information and the way the people who follow the Alex Jones fear-based Chicken Little model present information. And if you watch my videos, you should be able to recognize those things without me saying anything. This person should have been able to, they obviously watched enough of my videos to understand me saying that, and they thought they saw some flaw, that I was, being a hypocrite because I was, in their mind, also using fear. And I was just like Alex Jones. But again, there's enough information for this person to see past their limited ability to comprehend what's going on. Or maybe they're just a troll, who knows? Doesn't really matter. But for you, you can hit pause right now, and there's four major things that I can think of that would show that there's a substantial difference between the way that I present information and Alex Jones's. And if you want to figure it out for yourself, this is, just in terms of your ability to evaluate these two different ways of disseminating information. The first is, this is the major one, is that I'm not saying that the world isn't collapsing. I'm not saying that there isn't some apocalypse, because I say it all the time. I say that we're in a period where the old system is going away to give way to a new system. And the difference here between me and the fearmongers is that I think it's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not saying, oh, you should be scared of it. I say that people are going to survive and the human race is going to get better. I mean, that's part of the Heartfulness teachings, and I believe that. I don't think it's going to be great for me personally, and so many of you, at least on a material level, because we're 100% dependent on the system. So it's going to be rough in that way. Like, you can't sugarcoat that. But it's the ending of something, and the ending of something is always rough. You know, it's a sort of divorce of the human race on a system they're 100% dependent on. And then we have to come up with something new, and we have limited skills and limited abilities, and we're weaker than we've ever been before. And, you know, there's a lot of things that are negative, at least undesirable, but it's, you know, for the greater good of the human race. And it's something that on a spiritual level, that God is, you know, it's God's plan, and we have to accept it. And we have to be grateful for it as being good, even though it's going to be a rough ride. And that's completely different than the message you get from these fearmongers that are, their point of view is there's a bunch of bad guys, and this is the QBs, this is the right-wing truthers, this is the woke people, this is all these people that are saying there's a bunch of bad guys on the other side. And we have to save the world from the deep state or from the Trumpers or whatever your point of view is. They all think they're saving the world. They're the good guys, and the other side's the bad guys. And the system's great if you get rid of the bad guys. It's a wonderful system, but it's not a good system. The capitalist system seems good to people who have money, and most Americans do compared to other people in the world. But if there's opulence and wealth, and the more wealth there is, when there's trillionaires, then there has to be billions of people who have soul-crushing poverty. And so the first part of this, that there's a differential diagnosis between me and the people who are following the Alex Jones model of being a truther, is I'm saying that the collapse is, you know, God's will, and the system is horrible, and even though we're dependent on it, even though it's going to suck for us, it's a good thing. And that's a substantial difference. It's not using fear. I'm not saying what's happening is bad or wrong. I'm saying it's, you know, it's supposed to happen. Like, this is obviously what's supposed to happen. People suck, the system sucks, and now it's collapsing, right? The second thing is there's no fear. I don't use emotional manipulation and fear. I talk in a calm way. You know, there's positive energy in my videos. And many people say, you know, they watch my videos and they have a feeling of lightness in these very serious topics. They're, you know, they're laughing, or it doesn't seem as bad when they're listening to me tell it, as opposed to so many of these other truther channels that are fear-based. So that's number two, that there's no fear, there's no hatred, there's no, you know, I'm not playing on people's emotions. I'm not manipulating your emotions and things like this. I'm not emotional at all about it. I'm very calm about it. And that's a huge difference. And so this is two things a person could easily have figured out for themselves, instead of, you know, thinking that they're somehow superior and they've caught me being a hypocrite, right? Like, you see this all the time, these types of comments and low consciousness, but the information's right there in front of you. And the other difference, and I'm talking about all these movements, the Q stuff, the woke people, you know, all these left-right movements, all these, you know, I mean, these movements of change where people think that the system can be saved and it can't. And the system, you know, is, all systems collapse just like everything dies, and the system's no exception. Another difference is I'm almost always right. Like, there's times that people will claim something's a disaster and it's going to happen, and it doesn't. I mean, that happens all the time with QBs, and, you know, it's happened with Alex Jones. And their opinion is always the world's ending, but it shouldn't. We got to save the world, you know. I mean, all these types of ways that they present information. And usually when I say something, and again, I don't say it like it's a fact. I don't announce it like it's 100% sure, because I'm not, you know, personally. But when I say something, almost always is pretty accurate, right? And so if I'm saying that what I'm seeing is that they're about to dump the dollar's about to be devalued, right? And, you know, they're using, they're trying to put everything in hard assets, and there's lots of information out there. And that's part of a inevitable pattern that was going to happen at some point. They got to dump the dollar as world reserve currency, which is a part of the plan. They're moving to digital currency, and cryptocurrency is taken off and things like this. Then, you know, it's a complete difference than people that always come out and say this is going to happen, and most of it doesn't. And then when it does, like Alex Jones, oh, look at how right I was all these times. Well, yeah, if you're going to throw a million rocks at something, you're going to hit something eventually. Like you see these trick shot videos where it looks like the guy shot one shot and hit it, and they've been doing it for like 3 weeks. And they finally make this incredible shot, and they're like, yeah, I did it. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it took you 3 weeks. Like, it's a total waste of time, right? And so this no trick shot here, it's, the accuracy rate in my videos is probably really high. Like, I don't even think about it because my sources are better, and the information that I get is like cleaner and purer because of the Heartfulness system, which I'll get into in just a moment. So there's difference number 3, right? And difference number 4, and this is the biggest one, the most important one, is that I have a viable solution, which the problem is actually a part of the solution. The problems that we're having now with the system collapsing, the apocalypse, is to give way to the solution as it's been described in the Heartfulness system. The Heartfulness method of helping people to connect to God internally is the reason for the collapse right now, that there is a better way. There is something that is going to bring about a transformation in the human condition. And the people that are pitching this fear-based, and this includes, again, the woke movement and the far right and the far left and the Alex Joneses, what they're saying to you is that things are wrong, but the system can be saved, and you have to do something to save it. In Alex Jones' case, it's an information war. I mean, it's all an information war if you think about it, trying to convince as many people to agree with your point of view as possible and then force that opinion on the people who don't. And that if you woke up enough people or you got enough people woke or whatever you want to, whatever terminology they're using, that's going to change what's happening right now. That then those people will band together and get rid of the evildoers, and that ship has sailed. Like, that isn't going to work. Like, it never was going to work, but now we know it isn't, because there is now an oppositional side that's using the same thing, the same template. You have the Alex Jones people, you have the QBs, that's a new thing, and then you have the woke people on the left, and all of the Trumpers and all these different groups, and they all think the same thing, that if you can reason with your relatives and your friends and get everyone to see the problem through your eyes and the solution through your eyes, it's going to work. And it's all based in the system, and more importantly, your lifestyle and everything that you like and believe in and want to keep can be saved. And that clearly isn't the case anymore. How many people actually think the system can be saved? Through politics, through media, through information? No, none of those things. Because you're only looking at it through a binary point of view. And you're only looking at it through a lens of you don't want the system to collapse because you're 100% dependent on it. And so am I. Like, I just had to come to terms with, I'd love this system to last through my lifetime, but I mean, then we're sticking our kids and our grandkids with the problem. And so at some point it's going to have to collapse. I'm not in a hurry for it to do so. This is the good part of the apocalypse, where we still have, popcorn. I don't like popcorn. I'm using it as a metaphor. We still have popcorn to watch the collapse, right? And popcorn could be, any number of things. The internet, the TV, all kinds of good foods and things we can get at the grocery store. We still have our lifestyle. We're watching this very interesting part of this show, this epic part. It's very, compelling. It's very interesting, the apocalypse, right? It's the most interesting period of time that I've lived. But then once it starts, affecting our lifestyle, it's not as funny. Once we're all fighting over, a rat for dinner, then it's not as funny, right? But right now, it's like we still have the good things of our system, and we're in a real interesting, it's a moment of truth where truth is coming out. And so this is why, I'm making it enjoyable for myself and for many of you in these videos. And there's, good things about it, and it's funny, and it's compelling, and it's interesting. But at the end of it, right, we have to prepare on the other side for what life is once the system collapses, which it is, right? The system's collapsing. I don't know the time frame. And so the solution that I provide here, which to me still has a valid chance of coming true based in my experience of the heartfulness system. And again, it might not work for you. You might not accept it. But again, have you tried it, right? The heartfulness system has worked for me right now. It works for me 27 years ago when I started, and it's worked every day, every moment since. The heartfulness has made me a better person and made my ability to function in the world, regardless of the circumstances, better. I'm a better person using the heartfulness method, using the heartfulness system of connecting people to God, the transmission and the cleaning. It's 100% delivered. The organization and the people in the organization, I've had problems with since day one. I'm just, not a organizational person. Like, I don't have any contact with anybody but my brother, really. I don't really speak to or have any contact with other members of the system, and really have had, negative experiences, good experience, positive experience, great experiences, as well as negative ones with people in the system, right? So it's not about the organization for me. It's about the system, the transmission, the master of the system, the cleaning has all delivered. And the teachings that are there and the prophecies and things have been 100% right for me. Like, it's all come true. It's all at least, potentially coming true, or things that have happened, or the teachings themselves, applying the idea of samskaras, applying the philosophy of the system to my life has worked 100% of the time. It's delivered better results than I would have ever imagined. It's the only thing in my life that's ever worked and been 100% positive, and it's exceeded my expectations and my imagination. Like, I've never had anything in life where, when I was anticipating something, right? When I was going to do something, going on a vacation, going to a place, I was, going to watch a Super Bowl, whatever it might be, going on a date, going on, doing these different things where you have anticipation of how great it's going to be. And some of the things were great. Some of the things were, better than I thought they were going to be. Some negative things that I was dreading turned out to be much more positive experience than I thought. I mean, there's been those. But in most cases, in the materialistic system, the American system, things I anticipated as being positive, things that I was looking forward to, things that I, bought into the hype, things that I thought were going to be, better than they were, always disappointed, right? Always, came up short. How many times were you going to a celebration, a party, whatever, a birthday, Christmas, or you're going out to get drunk, you're going partying, you're going clubbing, or using drugs, and you were really looking forward to it. You were really, you had a lot of high expectations, and it fell short. When you experienced it, it wasn't as good, and it was actually like a bad experience in many cases. In the heartfulness system, it's been just the opposite, where the end of whatever happens by the end of a gathering or the end of an experience in the heartfulness system, it has 100% delivered for me. And it may or may not do that for you. Like, I don't know. Like, I can just speak from my own experience, but I know it's worked for my brother. I know it's worked for lots of other people who do the system. And so it is something that's always exceeded my expectations. And so that segues into the next part, which is about where I get my information, how I go about getting my information, specifically on giants and human beings being test tube babies and things like this. And so on Sunday, Daji Kamlesh Patel, the president and master of the heartfulness system, had the yearly meeting of the American, branch, the American part of the heartfulness organization. I just talked about this annual meeting. It's something to do with, you have to do it every year. It has to be an official yearly meeting. And it happened on a Zoom call. And he reaffirmed a couple of things, big things, that he said Babaji, that when he was a young man, Daji met Babaji right after he started the meditation. So he went to Babaji's house, and so this is 1982 or something, 81. Babaji passed away in 83. And so Kamlesh was a young man, and Babaji was at the end of his life, and he sat with him, and Babaji said a number of things that later became messages and talked about in the Whispers of the Brighter World. And one of the things was Babaji talked about how there was going to be a genetic mutation. There was going to be a change in human beings where they were going to be more spiritual in nature, that they were going to, we were going to evolve collectively to be more spiritual and more advanced. We were going to be raised to a higher vibrational level spiritually, and that was going to affect how we are on a biological, genetic level. Like people are just going to be different, more evolved in the future because of the Heartfulness system, because of Babaji's work. And so this is something he talked about in his lifetime, but it's talked about quite substantially in the messages, the Whispers from a Brighter World messages. There were these channeled messages that Babaji has been given from the spirit world to this French medium, this French woman who has since passed away. And there's more of these messages than any of this type of channeled material. And these messages, I was, reading these messages back in 2005. And they had so much of, what I cover here in terms of truth or information in there. They were very subtle, though. They weren't, they were not very detailed. Some predictions, some things about electromagnetic pollution and money power, talked a lot about money power and the collapse of the civilization, all these things. And so I started research on the internet, when I was reading these things and seeing what physical evidence was there supporting these things. I wanted more details. And so there's a lot of what I cover here comes from, those two processes, things that were hinted at or, talked about in literature, specifically these Whispers from the Brighter World, but other aspects of the literature in the Heartfulness teachings, and also doing research on the internet. So going back to this Zoom meeting with Daji for America, he talked about how he wondered how Babaji and the Heartfulness system would bring about a genetic mutation in a spiritual evolutionary step in the human species. And as he thought about it, he realized it was when there was a certain number of people doing the meditation, when there was enough people doing it, that it could be done collectively. And then he segued into saying we need to bring in more people in America, that more people had to try the system in America to get, the numbers up to help move this evolutionary process forward. And he talked about having a 5-year goal. And then he mentioned these prophecies that Babaji had said that there was going to be a major event in 2025 or 2026. And I never heard Daji or Master Charji reference this particular teaching, that there was, this date now, or a sort of a loose date that would be at the end of 2025 or the beginning of 2026. It didn't give a month or a date, but it was, he said in 25 years, and the message was from 2001. And so that's around 5 years from now. And so 4 or 5 years, depending on, what happens. And this major event was going to be something bigger than we've seen, something, that's going to affect life on planet Earth. And then once that first event happens, there's going to be a series of events that are going to reshape the world and the system in ways, we can't even imagine now. And as big as COVID seems, and as big as all these things seem in terms of how it's affecting people and, some of these other events, economic collapse, this thing in 5 years from now or 4.5 years from now will, be a transformational situation. And so the Whispers of the Brighter World messages didn't come out until 2005, but I read Babaji's, there's a chapter called My Vision and Reality at Dawn, and he talked about there was going to be a new civilization born on the bones and ashes of the old civilization, and the civilization would have spirituality as its base, a internalized relationship with God at its base. So this is something that he wrote, or was first published in 1956, so he wrote it in the 50s. And when I read the book, it had a lot of abstract spiritual concepts, but I understood them, and I wouldn't have understood them had I not been given my first introductory sittings, meditations, and had the transmission. And I realized the transmission had like opened up and pulled out of me information and tendencies that I had inside. And I didn't understand it like this, but it was, things from a past life, and there were things that were from my soul, my spiritual essence, that hadn't opened up in me as a human being. Like I hadn't realized my own, desire for spirituality, desire for an internalized connection to God, and any of the accomplishments probably isn't the right word, experiences that I had either on a soul level or in previous existences, because it builds on other things. Your spiritual life builds on your, spiritual journey from whatever, previous times and things that you have on a soul level. And some of those things are dormant when you're born, you're a kid, and they're there, but they're not, you have to be pulled out of you. Just like some scars and negative tendencies, like, being an alcoholic. You're not an alcoholic when you're 7 or 8 years old, but then you take your first drink. There's a great Simpsons where the drunk character Barney is some Ivy League student, and he takes his first drink, and he goes from looking like a sort of preppy, elitist person to a drunk, that is always in the bar that Homer Simpson goes to. So you have things in your life that pull out, maybe you have a gambling addiction, or maybe you have, other tendencies that come out in, say, war or stressful situation, or tendencies that come out when you're married, good tendencies and bad tendencies, dormant programs, right, that are waiting to flower in the right circumstances. And in terms of my internal desire to, find God and connect with God and these things, it was pulled out of me. And then some of my understanding, things that I, talk about now, my understanding of the, spirit world and understanding of, spiritual concepts, were either awoken in me by the transmission of the Heartfulness system, or were put into me through the transmission. Like I downloaded a spiritual program. And so when I read these books, My Master and Babaji's first 5 books, very short books that are put in a compilation, the complete works of Ramchandra, I understood a lot of what was in the books, and I knew that it was because of the transmission. And I thought, what a wonderful thing that the information is put in you so that when you read the book, it's pulling out information that you already understand, which is completely different than most books and religious texts where you understand the concepts intellectually, and then you have to have some sort of an awakening, a heart-based experience. But here the heart-based experience came first, and then the knowledge came second, which was, a complete different way of presenting information. It was, already in my heart in a sense, and then the book just pulled it out of my, internal world, my spiritual essence. And I was, blown away by that. I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is an incredible system. So it was very easy for me to trust the system, and then it was just right, or, it just worked. I mean, over the next 27 years, it just, it was very efficient. It worked. It delivered time and time again for me. So it became a trusted source for me. The information that's given, and then the spiritual revelations that occur internally through my meditative process, I began to trust more and more, and using my heart as an instrument to guide me through life, and also do research with the heart as well as using the mind to do research. So that's what I present here. And that's why I think it's much more accurate, because instead of just me as a human being using my limited resources and my limited abilities, my limited intelligence, the emotions and my own personal preferences getting in the way, by using the Heartfulness system and bringing God and my soul into this experience and this, journey, and then using that as a way to decipher what's going on around me and understand what's happening in the future, is much more effective. That's why there's where I will be right a lot more times than people who aren't using this method. And so that's to answer, in part some of these questions that were asked about where I got the information about giants. The giant thing, I, had long suspected that there was, other species. And you see this in, myths and legends talk about giants, and, not just in the Bible, but throughout ancient texts all around the world. But I think the physical evidence is even more compelling because there are people who are just huge, right? They're so much bigger than other people. And that seems to come from some, genetic trait. And you really have to see somebody that's 7 feet tall, or even anybody over about 6'7". Because I played basketball for years, and I'm like 6'1", 6'2". I have long arms, right? And, I'm considered above average height. And so I think the average male is about 5'11" or something like this. So I'm above average. And when I played, people who were over 6'7", 6'5", 6'6". I mean, you look at the NBA and you'll see little guys running around there, Steph Curry or someone like, Kyrie Irving. Steph Curry's like 6'4". Kyrie Irving's probably my height or a little bit taller. And so they're dwarfed. They look like, children next to some of these big centers and, these tall people who are 7'6" or whatever. Like there was a question asking me the difference between, my belief in Bigfoot or giants. Well, there's a lot more evidence about giants. And I'm not saying, Bigfoot seems like, I don't even know. Like, I would like it to be true. And they are discovering new species of things. It just seems like, unless they're hiding evidence, and they could be, that's a lot more of a reach than giants. And there's lots of archaeological type of evidence about giants that's been covered up. But in terms of the human genome, every once in a while you'll have, small people, 5'6", the dad is 5'6", the mom's 5'2", and they have a 7-footer. And you're like, wait, how did that happen genetically? Like you'll see, people who are, you go to a village where most of the people in the village are tiny or smaller than average, and then they have a giant or something. And then you have little people, people who are very small, and they come out of, the same genetic material as average height people. So you have giants and then very small people, little people that are, completely different on a different spectrum. And all of a sudden the human genetic code spits out a different, a completely different sized human being. So there's three things here in terms of evidence. There's literature, there's, ancient text that talks about giants and people that were of a super size, and then smaller people as well. And so as a, different group of people that all, all the same, like they would always produce a giant, or they genetically, or they would always produce a small person, but they were people that, could also have babies with humans. So then the genetic code would be mixed together. And so there's stories of this and, ancient literature and religious texts and things all across the world. And then there's archaeological evidence. And of course, some of this stuff is going to be, people are going to make things up or fake it. There's always going to be, stupid stuff that happens. But that doesn't minimize the true things and the real thing. And then there's human beings that are considered giants, right? People who are, far above average height, and then people who are very small, like little people that are much smaller. So those things is very compelling evidence. And then the Heartfulness, in one of the Whispers of the Brighter World, Babaji said, when the race of giants disappeared. And when I went back and reread it for that video, I thought he might have just said giants, and you could read it in various ways, but he said the race of giants, that this was a different race of people. And there was other things talking about how there was a different race of people that were here before, that the human beings that are now here. And again, there's a lot of evidence supporting this genetically, but in terms of the Whispers of the Brighter World messages, he said that human beings of today have come from test tubes. And so what appears to have happened, you can watch, there's a lot of videos, I don't know if they still exist on YouTube. There's this guy, Lloyd Pye, and some other guys out there that were talking about the human genome. And like, for example, the second and third genetic sequences are fused together. There's this gene, the second and third human gene are fused together. And so this is from Wikipedia, and it says, fusion of chromosome 2 in humans. Human chromosome 2 is a result of an end-to-end fusion of two ancestral chromosomes. The closest human relative, the chimpanzee, has nearly identical DNA sequences to the human chromosome 2, but they are found in 2 separate chromosomes. The same is true of the more distant gorilla and orangutan. So they're saying that human beings came from apes, right? And that we have evolved from, more than likely chimpanzees, the closest genetic relative to the human being. But in this chromosome, right, this 2 chromosome, the second and third chromosome in the chimpanzee are separate. But in the human being, they're fused together. How did it get fused? So to understand this, in every human cell, you have these tiny, tiny cells, right? It says, a human cell normally contains 23 pairs of chromosomes for a total of 46. 22 of these pairs, called autochromosomes, look the same in both males and females. In the 23rd pair, the chromosome differs, which makes up the difference in biological sex, right? So in every one of your cells, there are these chromosomes, these 2 fused chromosomes that are the second and third chromosome. And it differs from the chimpanzee, which is going to have 48 chromosomes. Here's the write-up of that. Human is represented by 46 chromosomes, whereas chimpanzees have 48. However, there's a major difference corresponding to the human chromosome 2. It has originated due to fusion of 2 ancestral autocentric chromosomes corresponding to the chromosome 2A and 2B in chimpanzees. And that fusion of chromosomes meant that there was less chromosomes in terms of the genetic material, which allowed us to develop opposable thumbs and, a higher developed brain, frontal lobe, and these things. So it's significant because we share like 98% or 99% of DNA with chimpanzees. And that 1% difference has to do with chromosome 2A and 2B in the chimpanzee fusing together. And their explanation's stupid. Every now and then chromosomes fuse. This fusion occurs as sperm and egg develop, as pairs of chromosomes fold over each other and swap of DNA. And that really doesn't make any sense because you're saying that there was a normal, healthy chimpanzee baby, and one day the chromosomes in one baby, because the sperm and egg got messed up, folded over each other and create a human being, right? Like that doesn't even go with the evolutionary theory. That would mean there was one baby's egg got messed up and it created a human being, and a human being was born out of a chimpanzee, and that created more human beings that had the same chromosome issues, right? The same fused chromosomes. And so it's more likely that this was genetic manipulation. I mean, there's lots of evidence like this. So you can go, look at these videos and decide for yourself, but there's lots of evidence genetically that there was a slave or something that was bred between some sort of extraterrestrial chromosomes and DNA, and to get them to match up, they had to fuse this chromosome together. And so that is, to me, a more likely explanation than some random sperm and egg folding 2 chromosomes together in the cell, like the original cells, right? So the sperm and egg have, one cell, and they divide into 2, and in that process, the chromosome gets folded over and then replicates, because in every cell of your body, you have 46 chromosomes, and a chimpanzee has 48. And so those are the genetic differences, right? Very similar, other than those, in terms of the genetic makeup of these 2 species. And so what if they took a chimpanzee and some alien DNA, some human DNA of these, visiting creatures, visiting humanoids that were here, people that were here, and they splice this DNA together. They're doing this now with spiders and goats and stuff, right? You can look up spider goats, and human beings are messing around with chromosomes and DNA now. They're splicing it together. And so we now have this technology, and that's the technology that created us originally. In Whispers of the Brighter World, there is a sentence that, there's a paragraph that talks about how we were created in test tubes. And this is probably about 5,000 years ago. So there were different people on this planet, and then they had this, what I can only assume was a slave. And there's, messed up things in our genome, lots of diseases and allergies and lots of things that don't add up. Like people have a lot of genetic flaws and very susceptible to various types of weaknesses and things. And there seems to be a heightened level of fight or flight, making human beings more aggressive, which would have come from a group of human beings being created for security or for armies or whatever it is, right? So very warlike people who were created to be slaves, and we're now on this planet, a planet where we are left alone with, messed up genetic code and not a clear grasp on our origin, because that explains a lot, right? That's why there's such a slave mentality here, such a gang-like criminal mentality, because of the way that we are created and not coming from, a natural evolutionary process. And Whispers of the Brighter World, I talk about how Babaji uses the word obscurantism, which is about how the people that control the planet, the leaders, so our so-called leaders, have access to information, and they're not giving us that information. And you see this with Freemasonry. As you move up the various levels in Freemasonry, you get more and more information. And then these other organizations, they have different information about the origin of our species, and they don't share that with the masses. So we've been given a faulty history, and that history is going to be in, your Bible. It's going to be in everything, right? Anything that's approved for the masses is going to have disinformation in it because they've told a faulty story, and that's one of the ways they can control people. And so you're given these stories, the theory of Darwin's theory of evolution, these other things, scientific things and religious things, religious tellings of the story of how people were created, and then the scientific story of how people were created. And so once in a while, people will discover evidence, whether it's some, spaceship, or it's some, giant skull or something, right? And they have to, explain it away or make the evidence disappear because it would make the story that we're all told false. Like there's lots of evidence out there once it's uncovered that once you, see the evidence, you realize you're being lied to, and that the story that you're told about creation and all these things can't be true. And that's what we're doing here in the so-called truth community. We're finding out evidence of things and narratives that they don't jive with the story, the indoctrination we've been given. And that's, that's obscurantism. That's obscurantism. And then someone asked about Kali and the Kali Yuga, the relationship between Kali and the Kali Yuga, and the relationship between Kali and the Heartfulness system. And I also want to talk about what God means in the Heartfulness system. I always get people saying, well, what God do you believe in? You mention God in your videos. It's usually from Christian viewers or religious people. Let's start with the Kali stuff first. And so Kali is people think of Kali as the devil or a demon in the Hindu religion, the equivalent to the devil or the demon in the Christian belief system. But Kali is actually not a negative being in the sense of going against the will of God. And I don't know that much about this, but this is my understanding of it. That Kali isn't against God, isn't trying to usurp God, isn't working against God, but is providing a function. And that function is destructive in nature. And it's not Shiva, which is, the cosmic functionary of destruction, because destruction is necessary. But people don't like destruction. And Kali can also be associated with consequences. Like if somebody does something bad to Mother Earth, and then there's a consequence generated, a negative, destructive consequence, a rage type of consequence, then that would be something that comes from Kali, right? And this is irrespective of whether you believe in the Hindu religion or not. Either this essence, I've talked about this before, that there are spiritual beings or soul energy that occupy these various cosmic functionary and material function on planet Earth. Everything that exists also exists in the spirit world. And so something can't exist in the material world unless there is a soul, an energy behind whatever exists. And that includes weather, that includes destruction or creation or death, right? In Western tradition, it's called like the Grim Reaper, or I think there's a god of death in the Greek tradition and some of these other religions and, ancient cultures and things. In the Hindu tradition, there is a cosmic functionary called Yama, which I think is Yama, the god of death. So when somebody dies, this spiritual being comes and makes that happen, right? Yama is there when anything dies in the material world. And in the Heartfulness system, when the second master of the system, Babaji's wife, passed away, he said that he was going to destroy Yama, and because he was upset about his wife dying, and he had the spiritual capacity to do that. And his spiritual master, Lalaji, said, well, you have the power to destroy Yama, and you certainly can do that if you want, but if you do it, you're going to have to take on his work. Then you're going to have to become Yama. You're going to have to be there, when anything dies. And Babaji realized that that wasn't a good deal. And so he decided not to destroy Yama. And for me, these things are either true or they're not, irrespective of whether your religion says that religion can't be true. Like if you're a Christian person and you're told that your religion's the only religion, or whatever religion you're in, and so you won't take information from the other religions because you've been told they're all demonic and they're not true, that goes against the actual truth of something. Either it's true or not. And I find a lot of the stuff in the Hindu tradition, in terms of these cosmic functionaries, is consistent with things that I've experienced and seen in my life. Everything has a spiritual energy behind it. And there are these spiritual beings that are part of it. So if that's true, then we're all, all of us have to deal with Yama. And Yama can be, it can be a different name in a different religious tradition. And it's just how accurate the description and the, because information gets distorted over time and things like that. But I believe in all these things. So in terms of Kali and the Kali Yuga, Kali is the presence, the destructive, sort of angry, all the things that we see going on in the world now, a very materialistic, negative time, because Kali is sort of in charge of this period of time. So it's just a bad time on planet Earth, right? The Kali Yuga is representative of a destructive time, but it's a good time to be cleaned out and purified, which is happening now at the end of the Yuga, where you have a good chance of being cleaned out because of all the negativity. So let's say you go through various Yugas, creating some scars and impressions and, addictions and things, but they're very, light, and they're not as negative as they would be in the Kali Yuga. They're not as materialistic, and you're more of a light spiritual person in these other Yugas. But this stuff builds up. In some of these lifetimes people can live in some of these other time periods and Yugas was thousands of years, especially these, other types of people, right? The Mahabharata took place 5,000 years ago, and all the other religions came after that, right? Came after the Mahabharata. So all the major religions and all of our history has come after that. And that's when there was this genetic manipulation, and the current human beings that exist in the world now were created, were, manipulated and brought into existence. And so the people that lived here before, during the Kali Yuga, during the Mahabharata, before the Kali Yuga, they lived much longer lives. That's the Vedic era, and people could live like 20,000 years in some cases. And so it's hard for us to imagine, but this was a completely genetically different group. But many of us, our souls were in those different types of bodies before. We were in those types of, beings before, especially if you have a soul that's had multiple existences, if you have an older soul. And so your soul was in the Vedic era, and now it's in a, sort of an inferior body in the Kali Yuga, and it's completely different. And that's why a lot of spiritual people struggle during the Kali Yuga. But in terms of what God is worshipped in the Heartfulness system, and God isn't worshipped in the heartfulness system, like people worship God in other religions. And in terms of Kali and these other cosmic functionaries, the idea is that those things exist, those things are true, that there is, a Shiva, which is the cosmic functionary or god of destruction. There is a Vishnu and a Brahma, all these other various cosmic functionaries. And that's acknowledged, as is other teachings in other religions. And in the heartfulness system, it's about finding the truth in each religion and each spiritual tradition. But none of those things are worshipped. None of those things are really a part of the heartfulness system. And aside from the transmission and cleaning in the heartfulness system, one of the unique aspects is the approach to God. Because it's not about worship. It's not about bowing down to God in some way. It's about living up to what God wants you to be. It's about reaching your full potential and serving God, performing the tasks and jobs and what God has created you to do. Everyone has a purpose, finding that purpose and fulfilling that purpose in your devotion and your love for God. It's more about loving God than worshiping God. And you can understand the distinction if you have somebody love you and you had somebody worship you, the difference is substantial. Or if you love somebody or you worship somebody, the difference is substantial. Like loving is a lot cleaner and a lot less icky than worship, right? Like worship is something that, really doesn't produce quality relationships where love does. And love is giving back to God what God is, which is love. So when you love God, that is the appropriate way to interact and be with God and have a relationship with God is through love. But worship is something, it's not as pure and it's a lot more gross and twisted than what love is. Worship is a different sort of a thing. And so the way that the heartfulness system defines and views God is that a human being can never know God. We don't have the intellectual capacity. No computer, the biggest quantum computer, couldn't know God. God is infinite, and God's expression is the entire physical universe and the etheric worlds. And so a person's mind can't expand to cover the whole universe. But your heart can. Your heart can expand infinitely. Your heart is something that can grow and grow and grow, expand like the universe. And the masters of the heartfulness system are people that have achieved an infinite heart in the sense that their heart expands the entire universe. And it's something that, anybody can achieve this, expanding your heart and, spreading your love throughout the universe and feeling everything in your heart. And so this idea of the one true God, well, there is one true God, but it's not your God or my God or your religion's God or my religion's God. It's nothing like that. God is what God is. You can't patent God. You can't claim to have the exclusive rights to God like religions. That's a lie. Religions are just scamming you, claiming that they have the only passage and the only ability to connect to God. Anybody can connect to God. The heartfulness system is just really efficient at doing it. The heartfulness system is the most effective system ever invented, ever created on planet Earth, at least, in terms of helping people to connect to God and go back to God and, complete their spiritual journey and develop a universal heart, and which are all just increasing your ability to connect to God, right? And go deeper into your relationship with God. And a higher developed person who is further along this path, is a saint or a spiritual master or whatever it is, and they're just further along. So they can help you get up to their level and their achievement spiritually, but they're still on their own personal journey, because the mysteries of God and the, understanding and relationship with God is something that is eternal, something that, it's an internal journey, and it's something that's, a beautiful process. And it's always good to have a goal or something to work for and to achieve. And so this idea of achieving something and then just sort of, you just are going to rest on your laurels and enjoy, 70 virgins and a mule and all these things, right, in heaven someplace, is, not accurate. You're always going to do work. God's going to give you more and more work. The reward for work in the heartfulness system is more work more work from God. So God sees, oh, you successfully did this work, so I'll give you more work. I trust you with more work. And so that's, in essence, the relationship with God and the heartfulness system is to do with the expansion of the heart, becoming a divine reflection, your best version of yourself, the one God imagines you as, right? What God wants you to become. Get closer and closer to God, and then do more service for God, do more and more work for God. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.